welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. You know, Brian, we got a little ice still out here, a little bit of frost still in the ground, but it's time to plant corn.
Well, it is, and if you're going to be planting corn, there are a lot of things for you to consider. Fungicide, insecticide, what are you going to do for fertility in that furrow? What's all going on at planting time? We want to talk through some of those things today because the worst thing, Darren, that could happen is you invest a bunch of dollars and it actually hurts your yield. We'll show you how that can happen on your farm.
Well, one thing we like to do a little bit before planting time is get our pre-emerge herbicides out. We aren't going to talk specifically about which products are best on a certain weed today, but what we are going to focus on is how to use those products and get the most bang for your buck.
As always, we have a difficult to control weed of the week coming up later in the show, but first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about planting depth in corn, soybeans, and maybe a couple other crops too, Darren. And you know, right before we got started here, Darren and I were just talking about mesocotyl and hypocotyl.
Well, it's been a year since we planted corn and soybeans, Brad. We got to refresh ourselves in some of these parts of the plants. You know, it's one of those really profitable things that you have to keep in the back of your mind. Huh?
But you know, it doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's the mesocotyl or hypocotyl. There are certain reasons why we want to plant our corn at a certain depth, or our soybeans, or whatever crop it is, and we wanted to get into that. So if you're a non-farmer, you can kind of understand some of the things that farmers do have to go through, and that there's a big difference from one plant to the next. You don't plant all your crops at exactly 2 inches deep, for example.
Well, here's the place to start. When we look at corn, that's a grass crop. When we look at soybeans, it's a broadleaf crop. Completely different crops, because you see with corn, that seed stays right in the ground, right where you placed it. But with soybeans, if you placed a soybean seed right by the corn seed, well, the two halves of the soybean seed actually become the first two leaves on the soybean plant. So that seed has to lift up out of the ground and become the first two leaves. So obviously you don't want to plant that too deep. Now with corn, you say, well, wait a minute, if that seed stays right where it's placed, why does this planting depth make such a big difference?
Well, the reason why is because with corn, the main roots of the plant are called the nodal roots, and they actually come out above where the seed is. I know it might seem a little weird. You'd think, well, from the seed, then all the roots are going to come out below, but that is not the case at all. So when you have some roots up above the seed, you have to have some space there for those roots to come out. And typically those roots, those nodal roots, are going to come out within about a 3/4 inch distance from the top to the bottom. Also, there's this mesocotyl that's about 3/4 of an inch at a minimum. So if you've got 3/4 of an inch for the mesocotyl, you've got 3/4 of an inch for the roots, you have to be a minimum of 1.5 inches deep when you plant corn. Always, there is no exception to that rule. So if you are, let's say, 1 inch deep is all, then what's going to happen is some of the nodal roots are going to come out above ground. Now, I'm not talking brace roots. Brace roots are supposed to come out above ground. You just don't want the nodal roots to come out above ground. When you have those come out above ground, you're going to have much worse stability for the plant, and you're not going to bring in nearly as much water and nutrients as if you had planted just a little bit deeper.
Now what happens when you plant a little deeper on corn is that mesocotyl is just going to be just a little bit longer. Those nodal roots will still take about 3/4 of an inch, but that mesocotyl will adjust. So if you plant it 2.5 inches deep, which is still in a safe range, but you're a little bit deeper, now that mesocotyl will just be 1 inch longer than it would if you were planting at 1.5 inches deep.
Darren mentioned the 2.5 inch depth. 1.5 to 2.5 inches deep is where corn should be planted. If a farmer is to plant his corn at 3 inches or 4 inches deep, then we can run into some problems. Probably not a big deal, but occasionally corn will, what they call, leaf out underground. That's obviously not good. It needs to leaf out above ground. The other thing is it takes so much energy to push that corn up above the ground that the farmer's given up some yield. The corn plant just doesn't do as well. Now, one important question that goes along with this, a lot of farmers are rolling their ground, whether they're planting corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa. They go over with a roller, which kind of packs that surface of the soil down. So farmers have asked, should I roll before I plant the corn or after? And the answer is always before you plant the corn. Because what can happen is if you have kind of light, fluffy soil in a spring, you plant the corn at, you think, 2 inches deep. Well, then you go over with the roller and realize, uh-oh, now it's only planted 1 inch deep when I back that ground down. That's not good because you're going to have nodal roots coming out above ground. So again, ideal planting depth is 1.5 to 2.5 inches for corn. And make sure if you're going to roll the ground, that's done before planting the corn, not after.
What I like about this whole discussion, Brian, is we've been talking for 5 minutes here already, and all we've got to is one little consideration a farmer has planting, and that's how deep are you going to put that seed.
And we've only talked mainly about corn. How about what's the right planting depth for soybeans, Darren?
Well, we like to plant soybeans at 1 inch to 1.5 inches deep.
Why?
Well, soybeans, it's a whole different animal, and when I say 1 inch to 1.5 inches deep, there's a couple things we're looking at. Again, that soybean is going to push the 2 halves of the seed out of the ground. So you don't want to be real deep, or you're going to have a tough time pushing those great big halves of the seed out of the ground. So 1.5 inches is really as deep as you should go on beans. But I say that you want to be at least 1 inch deep, and the reason why is that top inch of soil can dry out quickly. So you may get enough moisture to get a seed to germinate, but then with one good hot windy day, now that top inch is all dry and that seed could just wither and die. So you want to be real cautious about that. The other thing is the temperature fluctuation in that top inch is great. So if you're down a little bit deeper, 1.5 inches deep, you're in a better position with that soybean seed to keep it safe.
All right, Darren, just to completely change gears on you here, how about weeds? Where do a lot of weeds like to germinate from? Let's take foxtail, some of the most common grass weeds that you have. How deep are they actually germinating in the soil?
Well, with most of the weeds that we're fighting, we're dealing with them germinating in the top ½ inch or even 1/4 inch of soil. A lot of them are right up towards the surface, and many times what happens is when you're doing spring tillage, whether that's with your planter running through and just stirring some soil up, or whether you're actually doing some heavy tillage out there, you're actually exposing those weed seeds to sunlight. And it seems weird that exposing them to sunlight is just going to trigger them to germinate, but that's what happens.
For a fraction of a second even.
Yeah,
if they
it
get exposed.
doesn't take much time. And some university studies have been done with night tillage, and they have actually less weed germination when they do the tillage at night. Now, it sounds crazy, and I'm not telling you, well, you got to do everything at night because your neighbors are going to think you're nuts, for one thing. And another thing is you'll never get any sleep. But when you're out in the field, just think about that. Most of those weeds are in the very top ½ inch or so of soil. Now, there are some that are going to be deeper, but a majority of them are up high. So when you're putting your herbicides out, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, you want to make sure you have a good concentration of herbicide right in that weed germination zone.
Well, once again, it does vary depending on the type of crop you're planting in terms of how deep you want to plant that crop. But again, the ideal depth for corn is 1.5 to 2.5 inches, and the ideal depth for soybeans is 1 to 1.5 inches.
And unfortunately for all of us, our weed of the week can germinate all over the place. It might be shallow, it might be a little bit deeper. We'll explain what will control it coming up later in the show.
You expect a lot from this seed, and as it grows through each stage of development, Agroculture Liquid Fertilizers is there, feeding your crop exactly what it needs when it needs it. So no matter how you fertilize, no matter when, AgroLiquid efficiently brings all the nutrients your crop needs for a great harvest. From 1 kernel in the ground to 600 on the ear. For better yields and better quality, Agroculture Liquid Fertilizers.
There are more mouths to feed than ever before. What are farmers doing to meet the challenge? They're using agronomically designed equipment from Case IH. Our Quatrac technology, soil management, and planting systems are designed to foster a better growing environment that helps farmers maximize yield potential. And our deep understanding of agriculture is preparing them for the challenges ahead. Will you be ready?
I'm ready.
Go to caseih.com to learn more.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave P. Most of your applied P gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more P available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing P availability can lead to increased P uptake in the plant. That's more P, and more P. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.9 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your P with Avail.
Back in 1966, Advanced Drainage Systems, Inc. was the first company to start manufacturing plastic agricultural drainage pipe in the United States. And today, ADS continues our leadership with superior pipe production and service capabilities. Our roots are firmly entrenched in the agriculture industry, and we're committed to helping farmers grow their business. With 54 manufacturing plants and 24 distribution yards throughout the world, you can count on ADS and our green striped pipe to be there when you need us. Advanced Drainage Systems, the green striped pipe you can count on.
Speed, strength, and efficiency make Capello corn heads a head above the rest. Built with polymer components that exceed industry standards, Capello corn heads continue to push the boundaries for maximizing grain retention while using less energy. Visit CapelloUSA.com and learn more about Capello's state-of-the-art chopping technology that cuts cleaner, allowing your horsepower to remain where it belongs, with your combine, so you can harvest faster in all weather conditions. Add to that an amazing folding feature, and it's clear to see why Capello is a head above the rest.
Well, despite the snow that's still left on a lot of our ground, it's time to plant corn in a lot of areas of the country. So there are a lot of considerations that go into that. What should you use for fungicide, for insecticide, for a biological product, and for fertility right in the furrow or right near that furrow when you're planting corn?
Many of these things that we're going to add on and talk about today will provide a good return on investment most years.
Okay, but where I want to start, let's talk about the negative real quick. We can potentially hurt yield with fertilizer in furrow, especially if it's got a lot of salt, especially if you have lighter soil or low CEC soil, and if it's a dry spring. We don't know if we're going to have a dry spring when we plant that corn. We really don't know. So maybe it will turn dry all of a sudden. Our whole point is with fertilizer, you've got to be really careful. You want to use low salt products. Try to keep it off the seed if possible. Also, we're going to talk a little about putting fungicide in furrow, like Headline, for example. We had a nice return on investment last year with that. But if you don't mix it right, then you could have sludge in the tank, and that's not a good thing. So anytime you're doing any of these things, fertilizer, insecticide, fungicide, biological, you always want to do a jar test.
All right. Is that enough of the negative now? Can we start going with the positive?
Yeah, that's pretty. Oh, the other negative is just, well, I don't know if this stuff is going to pay for me this year. And what we always encourage you to do is look at the long-term average. Look at the 5-year average. If you do one thing on one hybrid, 1 year in one soil under one weather condition, it might not work. But you know what? A lot of times, all these things that we're talking about here are going to work on the average. So you just want to look at the average all the time and try stuff yourself on your farm. If nothing else from today's conversation, we just want to get you excited about trying some things. That's how we've ended up doing all the things we do on a big scale on our farm, because we tried them in the first place on a small scale.
Okay, well, speaking about trying things, one new thing that I'll start our show off today with that we're going to try on our farm. It's a product called Challenge 2050. It's mycorrhizae fungi that actually help bring more phosphorus into your plant.
And other nutrients.
And we've seen some nice yield gains over the last couple of years in trials. We had a little bit out on our farm last year. It looked pretty good. So we're going to try a little bit more of it this year.
Okay, so a lot of times when people hear about these biological products, they say, oh, I don't know if that stuff's actually going to work. But what I want to point you to, do a little research on the internet yourself. Look at how all the big companies, Monsanto, BASF, Bayer, every one of them, they've been buying biological companies lately. They're not going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars if there isn't actually some science and something good behind that. Now, I'm not sitting here saying, oh, all biological products work, but I'm just encouraging you, try some of these things out.
Well, what I like is I farm with one of the most skeptical guys I've ever been around. It's Brian. You know, nothing new. Oh, man, I don't know. They're making big claims. I don't know if that could possibly work. And so you look at something like Headline, and they talk about plant health benefits. Well, I say, cool, that's neat. If we can keep this plant healthier, and I see a little greener plant later in the year and all this, Brian's like, oh, I don't know about this plant health. You know, how did that plant health work out for the corn last year, Brian?
So my whole thing is, I'm not saying it doesn't necessarily work. I'm just saying, I don't know if I believe all this plant health, all these extra things happen.
He wants to see it on our own farm, and then he'll believe it.
That, but what I've always believed is that maybe there's just a low level of disease. Like right now, if you look at me, I may look perfectly healthy, but I might think, well, I got a little bit of a cold coming on, and if I was to take some medicine or whatever, I'd be 100% healthy instead of 99% healthy. Maybe that's where the yield gain is coming from. But you know, at the end of the day, I couldn't care less where the yield gain comes from as long as we have the yield gain. And like last year on our farm, we did do Headline in-furrow. in-furrow, and we gained like 6.5 bushels. We had a whole bunch of replications, and that's what we got. So we're going to try it on a bunch more acres this year. Hopefully we get that same kind of return, maybe better.
Okay, now you're probably saying, wait a minute now, you already talked about putting a biological in-furrow, now you're talking about putting this fungicide in-furrow. I'm probably going to put some insecticide in-furrow, and also we haven't even started talking about fertilizer. You know, fertilizer is important too.
You can do fertilizer any way you want. We just want to get it up into the plant, and in-furrow or banding of some sort is a very efficient way to do it. You just have to be careful and not put too much in-furrow, especially of high salt products like 10-34-0 or 7-21-7.
I think you had a great point there on the salt, and that's why we've switched over a lot of that liquid now. We've gotten away from some of those sources, and we're using very, very low salt content fertilizer, and we've seen a difference in our crop. We don't have to worry as much when you get in a dry year like last year, so we're using products like Pro Germinator and Sure-K right in the furrow, and that works fine. The question just gets to be, all right, if you're doing that and the insecticide and the fungicide and the biological, can you mix all that together at the same time? That's a good question.
Well, you're going to have a bunch of water with it, at least 50% water with all this other stuff, but make sure you're doing jar tests and just try some things out. So once again, yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff on our farm right with the planter. Insecticide, fungicide, biological product, and fertility, obviously. So it may seem like a lot, it may slow you down just a little bit, but we want to encourage you, focus on return on investment and try to figure these things out so it doesn't take you a lot of extra time, yet you can really increase yield and increase your bottom line.
Well, unfortunately, all that stuff we talked about doesn't do anything for our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?
For lower costs and higher production, see your Mandako dealer. Ask about the best production-built land roller on the market. Mandako, simple design for easy transport and easy use. 12 to 62 foot widths, heavy-duty 4x8 by 3/8 inch tube frame, and now available with a steerable wing wheel. Mandako land rollers. Improved soil to seed contact, faster, more uniform germination, less moisture loss. Eliminate downtime due to rocks. See your Mandako dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call 877-915-8790.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
Looking to maximize yield? QuickRoots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. QuickRoots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. QuickRoots is applied to the seed so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your QuickRoots today.
Today's Case IH equipment is packed with industry-leading technology, and Titan Machinery has the experts to make it perform to its maximum potential. We have a team of specialists and the entire Titan Machinery network to provide you with the expertise to keep up with today's advanced machines. Whether it be for your Case IH planters, sprayers, or precision farming equipment, our experts have the answers to get the most out of your equipment investment. Maximize your productivity with Titan Machinery. Better solutions.
Pre-emerge herbicides. You know, we all know we need to use them, but how do we get the most bang for our buck? Brian, I got a few questions for you today, and I'd like to start there.
Ooh, sounds good. All right.
Okay, first of all, do I put the pre-emerge herbicide on before I plant or after I plant?
If you want burn down activity, you're going to do it after you plant. You're going to want to do it about 2 or 3 days before the crop emerges. So if I had something that included sharpen, for example, like verdict, I might want to put that on 2 or 3 days before the crop emerges so I have the most weeds up as possible, then I fry them down. The problem with spraying a little later is now you're a lot less likely to get rain on that herbicide to get the herbicide into the ground and get the residual control you want. So there are two things we're weighing here. If I want burn down activity, I spray late. If I want residual control, I spray early so I get rain, get that herbicide into the ground, and get it working.
Okay, now a lot of the pre's that we're using today, they say, well, you can leave them on without doing any tillage at all. Is tillage beneficial to making them work better or not?
Tillage is always beneficial with a pre. So some of these companies will tell you, oh, don't till ours in. Tillage is always beneficial with a pre in terms of the residual control. Again, not the burn down activity, obviously. And the reason why is because these products have to get down into that root zone. Either they got to kill the root or the shoot. They're going to go in one or the other, the root or the shoot. Well, the root and the shoot are both below ground. So we've got to somehow get that product into the ground and get it active into that soil moisture. We don't want to till it in deep or anything with most of these products, but shallow would be great.
Okay, with Roundup ready crops, a lot of guys have gotten used to putting on a half rate of a pre or a 2/3 rate, something like that. With Roundup resistant weeds now, do you think we need to go to a full rate?
You absolutely have to go with a full rate because you're not getting help from the Roundup on certain weeds. And this might not affect you, but for a lot of farmers it does. And for most farms, it's only 1 or 2 resistant weeds that they have, and Roundup kills the other 50 weeds that are out there. But if it's those 1 or 2 weeds and they're key weeds for you, you better darn well get something good pre-emerge, and you might have to go with multiple modes of action. So for example, in soybeans, I can't use a high enough rate of Valor or Authority to for sure kill 100% of my water hemp and Lambsquarters, but if I did Valor and Authority plus a little metribuzin plus some Treflan, Sonalan, or Prowl, now I've got enough out there, all with activity on water hemp and Lambsquarters, and I can wipe those things out.
Okay, what do you use for carrier when you're putting pre-emerge herbicides out, and also how much volume do you need to get good coverage?
Not much. The less water or fertilizer, whatever your carrier is, the higher the pressure, okay, the smaller the droplet. In other words, you could go out, we've done it on our farm with 3 gallons of water and 80 pounds of pressure, and we had perfect control. So we had great spray coverage. But if you're going to go with 20 pounds of pressure, you probably better bump that water up to maybe 10 gallons. But on our farm, we're typically running 7 or 8 gallons, and it's usually fertilizer that's the carrier. So it's usually ammonium thiosulfate or liquid 28% or Access or one of these other fertilizer products. Just make sure that mixes well with your chemical that you're spraying. Do a jar test first. I like using the fertilizer because then I'm not making an extra trip to get some extra fertility out there.
All right, one last question. Are there any products that absolutely have to be incorporated?
The ones I can think of off the top of my head would be Treflan and Sonalan in soybeans. I know the label says 24 hours. It's more like 24 seconds in my opinion. If you don't cover those immediately, you're losing them because of very high vapor pressure. In corn, about the only one I can think of is Eradicane, and that's very seldom used anymore anyway. Most of the other products have lower vapor pressure, so you can lay them on like in a no-till situation and then get rain and it all works fine.
Well, there's some good tips on pre-emerge herbicides here, but we'll show you which ones will control our weed of the week coming up after this.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
You work to protect your farm's legacy and to keep it going. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our weed of the week is common Lambsquarters, and it was one of the first weeds I learned how to identify because it had that silvery dust on the tops of the leaves. It was always a dead giveaway.
Yep. One of the things we didn't realize though growing up is that Lambsquarters actually takes calcium out of the soil and puts it on its leaves. So when you have Roundup and you're spraying Roundup on there, a lot of people think, oh, the Lambsquarters resistant. Well, not really. It's just that the calcium is binding with the Roundup. So you have to make sure you're using lots of ammonium sulfate with your Roundup when you're trying to control Lambsquarters.
Well, we still, even though it's not Roundup resistant, we like the 3 pre-emerge herbicide approach in soybeans with Lambsquarter control. So we'll use one of the Treflan, Sonalan, Planter Prowl products, either Valor or one of the Authority products, and we'll also use some metribuzin. If you use all three of those, you may not have many Lambsquarters left.
Yeah, in corn it's a lot easier to control Lambsquarters because Lambsquarters is a broadleaf weed in a grass crop, not that tough, so use a pre-emerge herbicide, something like Sure Start or Triple Flex. Probably like Verdict a little better. Balance Flex is also really good. Those types of products have more activity than just a standard Harness Surpass Outlook Dual. And then post-emerge status I think is the best, but there are several other products that would work. Oh, one thing I was going to mention with Lambsquarters, it's kind of tough to control too because it has lots of growing points when it's small. It might only be 4 inches tall and have 20 or 30 growing points on it, and you got to kill every last growing point. Otherwise, if you don't, it just kind of shoots out again from the bottom and you got a tougher plant to kill in the end.
I also want to mention two other things. In soybeans post-emerge, it's really tough to kill, so you have to do a good job pre. You could use some Flex Star post-emerge. Raptor has a little bit of activity too. You don't have a lot of great choices. In corn, we've got good choices. In wheat, we can control it post-emerge with things like Wide Match in combination with Addition Broad Spec, or Husky would be the best, especially if you use the strong rate. And pre-emerge in wheat, you can use Sharpen too, and it does a nice job.
Yep, that's it for our Weed of the Week, Lambsquarters, but stay tuned, Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH. Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrac technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
We're getting started with corn planting on our farm. We'll talk about the things we're watching for in today's Iron Talk. There's sure a lot of things to watch for in the cab with monitors and so forth, but getting out of the cab and checking behind the planter is our focus today. Checking your spacing out is one simple task. With the Ag PhD Planting Population app, you can see exactly what your planting population is right away by just inserting a few numbers. Also, look at the depth of your seed placement. If you're seeing variance from one seed to the next or from one soil type to the next, you need to stop the planter and make adjustments. Soil conditions certainly vary within fields and from year to year, and down pressure will need to be adjusted. Just be careful to not have too much down pressure so you end up creating sidewall compaction. Getting all your seed in at the same planting depth gives you the best chance of perfect emergence. Now by perfect, the goal should be seeing all of your plants emerging within a 24-hour window. If one plant comes up just a few days later than the rest, it becomes a weed that you can't kill and a plant that just won't yield. Planting time is sure fun on our farm, but you need to be out behind the planter to avoid losing yield. If planting is done correctly, you should see a nice yield boost across your farm. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now, back to the show.
You can't fill a barrel any fuller than its lowest stave, and your crops can't do any better than the nutrient that's in shortest supply. Your yield potential is only as good as the weakest nutrient in your fertilizer program. Give your crops more than just NPK. Prescription apply all the micronutrients your crop needs, each one customized for your crop's potential. MicroLink, linking yield to potential.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
Honey Wagon? Can the sweet talk. Out here we treat manure, and when we talk treats, we don't mean cupcakes. Treating manure with More Than Manure Nutrient Manager can reduce solids in your pit or lagoon and ammonia levels in confinement buildings. PU, try N and P. MTM is the first and only nutrient manager proven to reduce nitrogen loss and phosphorus lockup. That's fertilizer loaded with yield potential. Looking for proof? Check the bin. Isn't that sweet? Results you can't ignore. A pit you finally can.
For lower cost, higher production, Mandaco Agri leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. Twister's ease of maintenance is forgiving and rocks and has contour conformity equaling zero downtime. Our hydraulically adjusted coulter angles make residue management easier, less costly. Spring or fall, the Mandaco Twister vertical tillage unit is the new leader. See your Mandaco Agri dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but be sure to join us again next time for another Iron Talk, Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, and a whole lot more. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Only 11.6 cents per dollar spent on food in America goes back to American farmers and agribusinesses. Where does the other 88.4% go, and what really raises food prices? Visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org to find out.